Hey guys, welcome back to more Entitled People Reddit stories. In this Ripestories video, my neighbor waited until my wife and I were both gone and then brought in heavy machinery and stole a part of my land. By the time I came home, my wooded hillside had been turned into an 8-foot dirt cliff beside his new driveway. He looked me in the eye and said, "Good luck fighting the city," so I made him regret every single word. And the first one is titled, "Tell your helpful neighbor off? Great, I won't be helpful anymore then. Poster on r/maliciouscompliance." So for context, I live in an apartment building in a ground floor, not in the US. When you order something online, the delivery guy stops at my building around noon, and I guess we are halfway down his usual route. I'm a student and every lecture is online at the moment, so I'm home basically every single day. Because I live in the ground floor, every delivery person rings at my flat so I can take in my neighbor's parcel. It is very common in cities in my country to do that. By the way guys, let me know in the comments, is that common where you are from? That neighbors just take your packages and then give them to you later? Let me know in the comments, I'm really curious. Anyway, me trying to be nice, I made an effort to answer the door every time it rang, so my neighbors wouldn't have to run to the post office to get their stuff. This happens maybe 3 times a week on average, so it was not a one-time thing in the past. Well, today I accepted 2 packages, and when one guy from my building came to get his, I accidentally gave him the wrong one. He came back a couple minutes later and told me off and said to better take care of the stuff of strangers. He was not that nice, so I thought the safest way to get your package would be from the post office then, where everything is catalogued instead of the seemingly unreliable neighbor. Well, that is why he and every other person in my building will have to walk 10 minutes to get their stuff in the future. I am done. And yeah guys, it seems like in a lot of these Reddit stories, people always get punished for being nice. Take that as you will. And the next one is the fantastic title story, which is titled, "Neighbor excavated my hill to expand his driveway. Costly mistake." Posted on r/maliciouscompliance. And by the way, if you enjoy the malicious compliance stories, please don't forget to like the video and post some star emojis in the comments if you want to help me with the damn YouTube algorithm. So I live in China, in a suburban area where the houses are spaced out nicely, but the terrain can be quite hilly. My wife and I bought our house a few years ago specifically because of the privacy it offered. Our property sits slightly higher up on a hill compared to the neighbor next door. Between our house and his house, there was a beautiful sloping wooded hillside that belonged to us. It was covered in thick bushes, small trees and deep roots that held the earth firmly in place. It created something like a natural barrier, so we never had to look directly into his windows and he never had to look into ours. And yeah, we were perfectly happy with this arrangement. The neighbor, however, was not. From the day we moved in, he proved to be a completely entitled person who thought the world revolved around his convenience. He owned several large vehicles and his standard driveway was just not big enough for him to park all of them comfortably. He was always complaining about having to shuffle his cars around, and he would often park slightly on the grass near our side or complain that the leaves from our trees were blowing onto his precious cars. But we mostly ignored him. My wife and I are quiet people and we just wanted to live in peace. We did not want to start a war over a few stray leaves. But his entitlement knew no boundaries. He wanted a wider driveway and he had his eyes on the hillside that separated our properties. He had asked me once if I would be willing to sell him a strip of my land so he could pave over it. And well, I politely but firmly told him no. I like the trees, I like the privacy. That should have been the end of it. Well, a few months later, my job required me to travel. I was sent away on a 4-week international business trip. My wife decided that since I would be gone for so long, she would travel to another province to visit her parents and stay with them for a few weeks. This meant our house was going to be completely empty for a month. The entitled neighbor must have noticed our cars were gone and the house was dark. He assumed the house would be empty for a month and decided that this was the perfect time to widen his driveway. In his twisted mind, he probably thought he could get the work done, and by the time we got back, it would be a finished project and we would just have to accept it. He was very wrong though. I finally returned home from my trip and I was exhausted from the long flights and just wanted to sleep in my own bed. I took a taxi from the airport and as we pulled into my street, I looked out the window at my house. My stomach instantly dropped. I told the driver to stop right there. I got out of the taxi, leaving my bags in the trunk for a moment, and just stared in absolute horror. My beautiful sloping wooded hillside was completely gone. The neighbor had illegally excavated an 8-foot deep chunk out of my wooded hillside. He apparently brought in heavy machinery while we were away and just carved a massive piece out of the earth. In place of the gentle slope he had left a sheer, unstable dirt cliff right on the edge of his new driveway expansion. It looked like a disaster zone. Thick tree roots were left dangling out of the sheer dirt wall. The soil looked loose and crumbly. If we got a heavy rain, that entire 8-foot dirt cliff was gonna collapse and cause a massive landslide right onto his property, and it would take a chunk of my remaining yard with it. It was incredibly dangerous, and right below this monstrosity of a dirt wall was his brand new, freshly paved, extra-wide driveway. He had effectively doubled his parking space by stealing my land and destroying my landscaping. I was beyond furious. I paid the taxi driver, grabbed my bags, and practically ran up to my front door to drop them inside. I did not even take off my coat. I just marched straight over to the neighbor's house and pounded heavily on his front door. He opened the door a few moments later. He was wearing a ridiculously smug grin on his face. He didn't look surprised or guilty at all. He looked like a man who thought he had just won a prize or something. "What in the world did you do to my property?" I demanded, pointing at the massive dirt cliff separating our houses. He crossed his arms and leaned against his doorframe. "I fixed the property line," he said calmly. "I graded my driveway to make it wider. It looks so much better now, don't you think?" "You destroyed my hillside," I yelled. "You dug an 8-foot cliff into my yard. That earth is gonna collapse. You are out of your mind if you think you're getting away with this." He just chuckled. He literally laughed in my face. He turned around, walked over to a table near his entryway, and picked up a piece of paper. He walked back and smugly handed the paper to me. "I got a permit from the city to grade my driveway," he said, tapping the paper. "It's all completely legal." I looked at the paper, and yeah, it looked official enough, with stamps from the local municipality. But I knew where my property line was. I knew he was lying. "I don't care what this paper says," I told him. "You dug into my land. You left a dangerous dirt cliff. You need to fix this right now." He stepped closer to me, still wearing that infuriating smug smile. "If you're so worried about little dirt, why don't you try and make me build a wall, huh? I've got a permit. You want a wall? You pay for it. Good luck fighting the city on this." I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I just looked at his smug face, handed the paper back, and said, "We will see about that." Then I slapped him in the face. No, that didn't happen, but I wish OP wrote that. I turned around and walked back to my house. The malicious compliance was about to begin. The very first thing I did the next morning was hire a professional land surveyor. I explained the situation to the surveyor on the phone, and he agreed to come out as soon as possible. I also called my wife and told her everything that had happened. She was actually just as angry as I was and told me to do whatever it takes to make him pay for ruining our yard. Legendary wife, by the way. The surveyor arrived 2 days later. He brought all of his advanced measuring equipment and all property records from the local municipality. He spent hours walking around my property, taking measurements, checking coordinates, and placing small wooden stakes. As he moved closer to the neighbor's house, I saw exactly where the stakes were going, and the neighbor saw it too. He came rushing out of his front door, yelling at the surveyor to get off his new driveway. "I'm doing my job," the surveyor told him calmly. "Don't interfere or I will call the authorities." The neighbor stood back, fuming and red in the face as the surveyor drove a stake right into the middle of the freshly paved neighbor driveway extension. Then he drove another one and another one. A neat little line of pink-flagged stakes cutting directly through the neighbor's new parking area. When the surveyor was finished, he came over to me with his report, and the results were exactly what I expected, but even worse than I imagined. The surveyor discovered that the neighbor's so-called permit was based on a completely fraudulent plot map. Essentially, the neighbor had hired some shady contractor, or maybe even doctored the map himself to make it look like his property extended much further up the hill than it actually did. By doing this, he tricked the local municipality into issuing a grading permit. The surveyor confirmed the hard truth. The neighbor actually dug 6 feet past the true property line. That entire 8-foot sheer dirt cliff, it was entirely on my property. 6 feet of his brand new driveway was sitting illegally on my land. I thanked the surveyor, paid him for his excellent work, and immediately started looking for a property lawyer. I found a highly rated lawyer in the city and set up an appointment. I walked into the lawyer's office, armed with the surveyor's official report, photos of the dangerous dirt cliff, and the story of the neighbor's smug little dare. I explained that I wanted to legally force him to build a massive, heavily reinforced concrete retaining wall exactly to city spec for me. The lawyer reviewed my documents and he looked at the surveyor's report proving the neighbor had used a fraudulent plot map to get his permit. The lawyer leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Your neighbor has made a very serious mistake," the lawyer said. "Falsifying documents to obtain a building permit is incredibly illegal. Damaging your property and creating a hazard makes it even worse. We have him completely cornered here." So my lawyer did not just send a simple demand letter. He actually drafted a formal complaint to the local Housing and Urban Management Authority outlining the permit fraud, attaching the surveyor's evidence, and CC'd the neighbor. Here in China, falsifying documents for a permit can lead to massive daily fines, the forced demolition of the illegal work at the owner's expense, and even criminal charges. The lawyer's letter to the neighbor was very clear. It stated that to avoid us pushing the city to pursue criminal charges for the fraudulent permit and the property damage, he must immediately secure the hazardous dirt cliff he created. He had dared me to make him build a wall to city code, and we were gonna do exactly that. The letter stated that he must build a heavily reinforced concrete retaining wall exactly to the highest city specifications, but we legally forced him to build it precisely on the true property line. The lawyer had the letter officially delivered. I happened to be sitting in my living room looking out the window when the delivery arrived. I saw the neighbor open his door, take the envelope and open it, and I watched as he read the contents. I watched the color completely drain from his face. The smug, entitled grin vanished, replaced by sheer panic. He realized if this went to court or the city inspector got fully involved, he was looking at devastating fines and potentially even jail time. He folded immediately. He had no choice but to comply with our terms to keep the authorities from tearing his life apart. Within a month, a large, fully licensed construction crew arrived at his house. The neighbor looked absolutely miserable as he watched them unload their equipment. He had to hire a legitimate engineering and construction firm this time because the wall had to be built exactly to city spec, which meant it had to be designed by structural engineers to hold back an 8-foot sheer wall of earth. I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the process begin. It was glorious. Because we forced him to build it precisely on the true property line, the massive wall ended up slicing right down the middle of his brand new driveway. The construction crew had to bring in concrete saws to cut a massive trench straight through his fresh asphalt that he had just laid down. They ripped up 6 feet of his new driveway to expose the earth below. The neighbor came over to the property line while the workers were sawing through his driveway. He looked close to tears. "Can't we just build the wall against the dirt cliff?" he pleaded with me. "If you make them build it here, my cars won't fit. I won't have enough room to even open my doors." I looked at him calmly. "You dug into my land and you told me to try and make you build the wall. I'm just doing what you suggested to me. The wall goes on the property line and I'm not giving you 6 feet of my yard for free just because you decided to steal it." He groaned and walked away, rubbing his face in distress. He had no one to blame but himself. The construction process took several weeks. Building a massive retaining wall to city specs here is not a fast or cheap process. They had to dig deep footings. They had to install heavy steel rebar for reinforcement, and they had to install proper drainage pipes so water would not build up behind the wall and cause a blowout or something. Finally, they brought in multiple heavy concrete mixer trucks to pour the concrete. The finished product was an absolute beast of a wall. It was a thick, solid, heavily reinforced concrete structure that stood 8 feet tall and spanned the entire length of the property line. It was grey, industrial, and incredibly strong. My hillside was now completely secure, but the impact on the neighbor's property was the truly satisfying part. Because the massive wall sliced right down the middle of the new driveway expansion, it rendered his new parking area entirely useless. He had spent money to widen his driveway, but now there was a giant 8-foot concrete wall blocking half of it. The space left between the wall and his house was completely awkward. And yeah, he could technically pull a car into the remaining space, but he could not open the car doors without hitting the concrete wall. He definitely couldn't fit all of his large vehicles anymore. In fact, he had less functional parking space now than he did before he started this whole stupid project, and the financial cost to him was just staggering. Retaining walls of that size and specification are incredibly expensive. Between the structural engineers, the permits, the heavy machinery, the steel rebar, and the massive amount of concrete, the neighbor had to foot the entire bill. I heard from one of the contractors later that the final cost for the wall alone was over 400,000 RMB, which is about $55,000 for those of you stateside. This did not even include the money he wasted on the fraudulent permit, the money he spent on the shady contractor to initially dig out the hill and pave the driveway, and whatever fees he had to pay to deal with the city's warning notices. In short, he was financially ruined by his own entitlement. After the construction crew cleaned up and left for the final time, I walked out to admire my new, incredibly secure property line. The neighbor was standing outside looking at the giant concrete wall that now dominated his view. He looked defeated, he looked exhausted, and he looked like a man who finally understood that actions do have consequences. He didn't look at me, he didn't say a word, he just turned around and walked back into his house, shutting the door quietly. My wife returned from her trip a few days later, and she was amazed by the sheer size of the wall. We both agreed that while we missed the natural look of the wooded slope, having an impenetrable concrete fortress separating us from the entitled neighbor was a very acceptable trade-off. And yeah guys, what can I say about this story? I mean the classic, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. This essentially, if you ask me, is the ultimate FAFO story, even though it's from China. I'm not sure if they know what FAFO means. I mean, OP's neighbor literally committed fraud, forged government documents, trespassed and destroyed the landscaping, and then created a massive safety hazard just because he felt entitled to OP's land. So yeah, OP definitely did nothing wrong, he just held the stupid neighbor legally accountable to the exact letter of the law. And I guess not only to the letter of the law, but also to the true property line. And now let's read some interesting comments from Reddit. The first comment said, "Your neighbor is an incredibly entitled criminal who thought he could steal your beautiful sloping wooded hillside just because your house was dark for a month. He excavated 6 feet past the true property line, leaving all this crap there. You simply did exactly what he dared you to do. You legally forced him to build a wall to the highest specifications right on the property line." That is what malicious compliance is about. And now, since you guys always love these crazy Reddit comments, the last one goes like this. This unhinged person said, "Are you serious right now? Your neighbor just wanted to park his large vehicles comfortably. He literally tried to do things the nice way and asked to buy a strip of your land first, but you firmly told him no over some stupid bushes. When you got back from your 4-week business trip, instead of working out a reasonable compromise with the neighbor, you immediately escalated to hiring a land surveyor and a property lawyer. That's not how you treat neighbors. Also, you threatened him with criminal charges and jail time. And then out of pure spite, you forced him to build a massive heavily reinforced concrete wall on the property line, forcing construction crews to rip up 6 feet of his asphalt. In short, you financially ruined a man and completely destroyed his driveway over some dirt. You are clearly an a-hole here." And yeah guys, I would agree, the a-hole is certainly the person who wrote this comment. You just gotta love Reddit. And the next one is a beautiful malicious compliance story that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "Rude Customer Asked and Received." So I worked in a small-town convenience store in the Midwest many years ago. It was part of a chain based out of Ames, Iowa. One night, as it was getting close to closing, a customer who had finished pumping gas came in to pay. He immediately started saying that he was not paying for the last gallon of gas because the pump had not shut off properly. I looked out and could see a small, maybe 4 to 5 inches diameter puddle of gas, maybe 4 ounces worth. I informed him of all the signs informing the users that they were responsible for what they pumped. Well, he got asinine and asked me what I was gonna do about it. He refused to pay the full amount, and without saying a word, I stepped out from behind the counter, walked around the pizza cook, the only other employee there who watched this all happen, and headed for the payphone next to the door. Mr. Asinine asked me what I thought I was doing, and I informed him that I was calling 911 for attempted theft. He told me to get back to the register and he'd pay the full amount, which he did while calling me every name in the book. I didn't respond though, which made him even madder. Once the transaction was complete, he pulled a little notebook and pen out of his pocket and gave me a really snide look as he told me, "I want you to give me the president's address. Now." Cue malicious compliance. "Yes, sir," I told him. "It is 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. I don't know the zip code offhand, sorry." He was so mad that he doesn't even realize what I've given him. He's just scribbling it down as fast as he can. Once he finishes writing it down, he closes his little notepad, pockets it and his pen, and tells me that I will be hearing from the Home Office once they receive his letter. As he is walking out the door, I raise my voice and say, "Sir!" He stops, turns around and growls back, "What?" I answer as sweetly as I can, "Have a nice night." I could see the vein on his forehead pop up, and before he turned and stomped across the lot to his car, the pizza cook, who has watched the whole thing, tells me, "Dude, you're cold." "Which part?" I ask him. Telling him to have a nice night, that was cold. I had to explain to the cook what the address was that I gave Mr. Asinine, and he had completely missed it. I've often wondered how far that guy made it before he realized what I had done. It still tickles me over 30 years later. And the next one is a wonderful malicious compliance story which is titled, "Grandma said follow the recipe exactly, so I did." So I was at my grandma's place, and sometime last year she has those old handwritten recipe cards and does not like changing anything. I asked if I could adjust the salt a bit, and she goes, "No, follow it exactly." Okay, so the recipe said 1 tablespoon of salt. I measured it out properly, and honestly, it looked like a lot, but I didn't say anything. So I put it in, and the food comes out way too salty. She takes a bite, kind of pauses, looks at the card again, then at me, and I said, "I just followed it." She just goes, "Well, you're supposed to use your head too." Really? Well, next time she told me to just do it by taste. And well, Ripe Stars, it sounds like Grandma was a bit salty. And yeah, I will see myself out. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you again tomorrow. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to make me happy.